9.6 is a motion by Councillor Jim Campbell on local police, and a coalition amendment has been circulated.
Councillor Jim Campbell.
Thank you, Lord Provost. This is a serious motion, and it's a serious issue for our city. I'm very grateful that the coalition have accepted the first 4 paragraphs of the motion. It is an attempt to set out the case, as best I understand it, on the data that's available, publicly available to anyone. And that data is quite emphatic. As a city, we have had a growing population over the last number of years, and yet as a city, we have seen a reduction in the number of local police officers that police our streets. And that, I would suggest, is not right. Our citizens would expect us to be fighting to ensure that we have the required number of police officers on our streets. And over and above that, the police officers that we fund on our streets. Because that is the purpose of this council giving additional funds to local policing. It's to provide additional police officers. So it is a serious motion. It was designed to strengthen the hand of this council in negotiations, because this matter can only be resolved in negotiation with the Scottish Police Service. And I had hoped that if this council enabled officers to go to the police service with a message from the council that they wanted to see progress on this in unequivocal terms, that would strengthen our hand in those negotiations. And I hope that might still be possible. I confess, regret adding point 2 under the instructions. Perhaps that was just a little bit of political theatre too far, and I would happily withdraw that if that were to make a difference. What I would do is draw council, obviously I'm sure everyone has read the motion itself, I would just introduce a couple of extra pieces of information for your consideration. If we compare ourselves with Glasgow, Glasgow has ceased to fund local police officers. In 2012-13, they contributed £3.2 million to local policing. This year, they contribute nothing. Thank you, Gordon. On the other hand, if we look at the numbers, in 2016, the last year for which reliable data is available, Glasgow had 37.5 police officers per 10,000 of their population. In Edinburgh, we have just shy of 23. That's a massive difference. It doesn't seem equitable that a city that has chosen to cease funding local policing has got almost 50% more officers to undertake local policing, whereas we, a city that have chosen to keep funding local policing to the tune of 2.6 million a year, do so poorly in comparison with the rest of the country. That's why we need to have a strong negotiating position with the police service to ensure that we have the local police we pay for, that our constituents expect, and that we value so highly to ensure we have an orderly society. I propose the motion.
And to second the motion?
Yeah, I support Jim's motion because I think we need to start thinking about what we do with taxpayers' money, because it just seems to be frittered away. And I urge you to support this, because why should the taxpayers have to pay more tax for less public services? They're suffering massive cuts, and we'll just spend money on 920 grand on 19 people, and now we've got the police thing. So please, I urge you to support our motion. Thank you.
To move the coalition amendment, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Lord Provost. Again, another assassination attempt.
One does wonder what's in these bottles. Right. Councillor Wilson, please.
I think I probably should do it formally after that. But, and in actual fact, there is reason why that might be the case, because I can't say I disagree with a single word Councillor Jim Campbell has said, nor can I disagree with the statistics that you have forensically provided. Indeed, I would thank you for bringing these things forward. And indeed, it is helpful in strengthening our negotiations on this subject. I would also like to thank Councillor Ian Campbell, who gave us all of those statistics some time ago, so they were in fact familiar to us. But what I would say is that the only reason, and I'm getting déjà vu when you were speaking, because all of these points that you have made are points that we have made to the Police Scotland and form part of the negotiations. We have agreed the amount for Police Scotland, but we have not agreed the partnership agreement which goes along with it. And it's the negotiation of that that is ongoing at the moment. And that is the only reason why we would have difficulty with the second part of this motion. I'm not even saying that we're not going to do these things. What I'm saying is that we may end up doing these things, but not just quite at this moment in time, because at the moment we're at an earlier stage of negotiation with Police Scotland on exactly what we want for our money. And should those negotiations prove to be not successful, then it may come to writing these letters and taking it to a higher level. So all I'm saying is, if we can get this is a helpful motion, but if we can get a consensus for actually taking this forward on the basis that we do accept everything that Councillor Campbell has said, and leave it to our negotiations for the moment, then we will come back at a future date should the second part of the motion be necessary.
To second the coalition amendment, Councillor McNee. Sorry, who is it?
Formally.
Sorry, McNee's meeting. Sorry, yes. It is you. Right, thank you. Are there any other contributions? Councillor Munro.
Thank you, Lord Provost. Fellow councillors, there are a few people in this chamber who will be aware that this authority pays over 1,000%, an extortionate amount, 1,000% more than any other local authority, to Police Scotland for services. Even Al Capone did not charge this rate for protection services. And what service do we receive for this generous donation to this loss-making service? Increased police numbers? No. In 2014, there were 1,167 officers in Edinburgh, and in 2017, there are 1,163, a drop of 4 for the city. Does it mean... wait now, I've just lost the other figures there. In the region in 2014, there were 973 officers, and there are now 934, a drop of 39, a total of 43 less officers. So the myth it pays for extra officers is scotched by the figures from the annual audit of the force by Audit Scotland. Does it pay for a better service? No. When Police Scotland was formed, the housebreaking team was dissolved, despite its proven track record, leading to an increase in this crime in Edinburgh and in particular in North Edinburgh. Does it mean our stations are manned? Well, no, actually. 53 out of 375 stations in Scotland are unmanned, and some can be found in Edinburgh. However, our generous contribution could help pay for the generous relocation costs to the Deputy Chief Constable, including tax and national insurance, of £120,000, or the £345,000 paid to 2 of their operational directors, or even the £199,500 paid to the interim Chief Finance Officer. Payments which Audit Scotland said, quote, do not represent a good use of public money. It could help an organisation so ruinously run that Audit Scotland predict it will be £120.6 million in deficit by 2021. Now, there are some in this chamber that would try to blame Westminster for this position, citing the fact that VAT was until this year charged on Police Scotland. Disingenuous and dissembling. The fact is that HMRC warned the Scottish Government that this would happen, and this advice was ignored. The Police Federation offered to the Scottish Government input and advice to help set up the service in a way that VAT would not have to be paid, advice that was ignored. This advice was also offered by Unite and Unison, and again this advice and help was ignored. The Labour Party even offered input and advice to help this, as did other opposition parties, so that VAT would not have to be paid, advice that was ignored. The creation of Police Scotland has been a disaster for the public purse and for the service itself. The protection money we are paying needs to stop, in my view. But in the meantime, support the coalition motion, heed Councillor Campbell's points, and make sure that we actually get a service and conditions that show exactly what service we receive for the extortionate amount we pay Police Scotland. We've already agreed the payment this year. Let's stop it after this year.
Councillor Barry.
Just two small points on Councillor Munro's contribution. Firstly, he will recall that in the Scottish Parliament, the Police Fire Amalgamation Bill was supported by the party he represents. Secondly, can I just remind him that for some decades now, police stations haven't been manned, they've been staffed.
Are there any other contributions? Councillor McVeigh.
I just couldn't help myself, Lord Provost. It was the shameless attack and misunderstanding of statistics that, I'm afraid, got me so motivated. I think people, particularly on this side, particularly Councillor Munro and his good friends and the Conservatives who are broadly aligned on this policy, their misunderstanding of, one, the national pledge, which was to maintain national numbers, not by geography. Police are deployed on a basis of need, and they're deployed nationally on a basis of need. So the crude, very crude, I'm afraid, analysis, as much as it is tempting for me to blame the Scottish Police Authority Board for incompetence, because that might politically be expedient to do so, Lord Provost, I'm not going to do that. In terms of the money, I would really encourage members of this chamber to engage with their local officers who we actually fund, because there is a startling misunderstanding about what our money is going towards. Our money is going towards additionality, and it's that, and I agree with Councillor Campbell, that is that has to be absolutely enshrined in the SLA that we sign with Police Scotland. We must ensure that the money we are paying is going for the purpose that we are outlining. But some of the contributions went a bit beyond that, and I'm sure the fuzzy understanding of what our money is actually going towards is a point of concern for me. These are funding local officers who are engaging in work that is expedient not only for the police but for us. This is about enshrining our priorities, advancing our outcomes as a city. These are officers working with our housing officers to make sure our communities are safer by putting together plans of how they're going to deal with people who are vulnerable and also people who are problematic within their community. The element of additionality has to be enshrined, but I would seriously urge anyone with the views of what we've just heard 2 speeches ago to engage with their local officers and actually get a better understanding of what this money is used for. It's not used as a supplement for Police Scotland. It's used to advance the outcomes that we have set out, and if people don't understand that, I'm more than happy to help facilitate meetings, Lord Provost, with the new Chief of Police in Edinburgh to make sure that understanding is there. But shameless attacks on what we're doing I don't think is really appropriate in the way to go.
Councillor Arthur.
So who can argue that policing should be the point that policing should be based on need? But I would have thought all of us in this chamber would be asking the Scottish Government and the Police Authority, Police Scotland, to invest more in Edinburgh, because despite spending 10 times more than any other local authority in Scotland on policing, crime in our city remains 31% higher than the national average. We've got the 4th highest crime rate of any local authority in Scotland. So I would say it's our job to stand up for Edinburgh, not the Scottish Government. Thank you.
Councillor Rose.
Thank you, Lord Provost. May I just address the issue of additionality? The only reason for the additionality that we've heard the Council Leader talk about is the inequitable distribution of police officers around Scotland. And it is because we're trying to plug a gap in this area that we have been pushed towards the additionality of which the Leader speaks. I support the motion.
Councillor Mowat.
Thank you, Lord Provost. It was interesting being taught to suck eggs by Councillor McVeigh there. I'm not quite old enough to be a grandmother, but I certainly felt like that at that point. Having been a board member of Lothian and Borders Police and overseen, and then latterly on the Police and Fire Committee in the Council, I think I understand the issues of additionality, and it is something of concern to me that after 8 months of this new council, it is unclear that we have a demonstration of that additionality through a transparent process because of the lack of replacement of the Police and Fire Committee, and it's unclear to me exactly how we are supposed to demonstrate that. Councillor Arthur went through the figures very clearly. It may be of interest to members of the Council who haven't been here, been councillors for as long as some of us, that one of the reasons we continued to pay this when Glasgow sat down is that we were essentially had a gun held to our heads by the police saying we would lose those additional officers if we took that funding away, which was 2 or 3 budgets ago. Now, that isn't about policing on need. Our violent crime rate in this city, unfortunately, is increasing. So I think it is very difficult to say that the core service that we're receiving is equitable and demonstrating additionality when we do not have an SLA in place at this point in the electoral cycle. So whilst we do welcome that coming forward, indeed when it does, I think it is absolutely right that this council chamber should be standing up from Edinburgh and making those points to the Scottish Police Authority and to the politicians at Holyrood, who ultimately are responsible for the police service now in a rather disgusting change of conditions, so that our police are essentially politically controlled, whatever fiction of independence they like to put out on that one, and that we should be seeing that as soon as possible. I would urge you to support the Conservative motion in Councillor Campbell's name. Thank you.
Councillor Ian Campbell.
Hello, I'd like to, Lord Provost, I'd like to remind us of the statement that was made by Councillor Wilson. The fact is that the partnership agreement for this year has not been signed. There is robust negotiation happening, and what we're asking as a coalition, we're asking the help of the whole of this council to stand behind this negotiation, to be united, so that we can have the greatest voice for this city in this negotiation. We recognise the point that Councillor Jim Campbell makes. We've noted this for some time. We're trying to apply scrutiny into this. We're trying to get additionality that will provide community safety for this city. And we ask all parties to get behind our amendments so that we can go with a one voice into this negotiation, that we strengthen the hand of Councillor Wilson in this, and that we can get the best deal for this city. Thank you.
Are there any other contributions? If not, right of reply, Councillor Jim Campbell.
Thank you, Lord Provost. It strikes me there's an awful lot of agreement across the chamber on the narrow issue of the funding for local policing. And I would like to thank Councillor Ian Campbell for getting to this data before I did. Indeed, there seems to be an outbreak of harmony almost amongst Campbells, because I know Councillor Mary Campbell was very keen to support Trinity at the previous council meeting, the community at Trinity Academy. Nonetheless, I would say to Councillor Wilson and Councillor McNees-Meakin that their amendment is misguided. We are in a very tough negotiation, and what we should be doing is making sure this council is pressing that negotiation with the utmost conviction. And to do that, we need to apply more pressure, because the pressure that's been applied in the years up till now has not resulted in the result we are looking for. Crime in Edinburgh has not fallen as fast as it has in the rest of the country. That's a fact. Edinburgh and all the cities in Scotland have higher crime rates than the country is at large. And Edinburgh, we have fewer local police officers per head of the population than the average across the rest of the country. The problem with the amendment is that it says that police deployment is based on need. That's true for the core service. What we're talking about is the additionality that ought to come from the money we are spending. And the problem with the amendment is that it is failing to recognise that critical point. The point of my motion is to make it crystal clear to the police service that we demand additionality for the money we are putting in that other councils have chosen not to put in. And the only way that should be demonstrated is through greater police numbers per head of population, something we do not have at present. I move my motion.
The division bell will now be rung and the vote will be in 1 minute. Lord Provost, item 9.6 is a motion on local police. It's moved by Councillor Jim Campbell, seconded by Councillor Gratzig, as per the agenda. Councillor Campbell, you mentioned the withdrawal of point 2. Do you wish that to continue? You talked about an adjustment by the removal of point 2, or do you wish a motion as is?
Yes, in the spirit of trying to find wider agreement, I am happy to do that.
To withdraw. So it's the
Yes.
motion as adjusted. And the amendment is from the coalition. It's moved by Councillor Wilson, seconded by Councillor McNees-Meakin. Those voting for the coalition amendment. (37) and for the motion as adjusted. (22) The amendment is carried. Next item is a motion in 9.7 by Councillor Jim Campbell, again on the Burnshot Bridge. A coalition amendment and a Liberal Democrat addendum have been circulated.
Councillor Jim Campbell to move the motion.